Came from behind. Is it very clear? No. Oh, miserable.
Debating the notion about Pope Francis calling the Palestinian Authority a state of Palestine and how that's awful, in government with April 1, Prime Minister Kenneth Kang, DPM Kelvin Chong, Government Staff Hong Yun with Kenneth Kang being the reply speech. Whoa, automatic cross. And in opposition, home ground NTU 1. Elbow Aditya Mitra, Diallo Lu Hui Yi, Opwit Vyasini Gopakumar, and Lu Hui Yi being the reply. You know the judges, right? Okay, so it's alright, we can move on now. No, no. Okay, without further ado, PM, kind of here.
As the leader of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis' role and primary role is to ensure that Christians all over the world are better off. And we think that this careless remark of calling the Palestinian Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories as the state of Palestine is a mistake that will cause the Christians, especially within Israel, to suffer. What's our stance? Our stance is that Pope Francis should stay silent on the issue, just as his predecessors have, maintaining a neutral position on an issue that doesn't even concern the Catholic Church. So what we believe this does is that it compromises on his ability to play his role as the Pope, the leader and protector of Christians all over the world. Let us first understand the context of where this debate takes place. This takes place in a particular context whereby the history of Christians persecuting Jews is slowly being forgotten, and in fact there are revolving relations between Israel and the Catholic Church, which eventually led to his visit to Israel. But what has happened as a result is that there is still some residual distance and tension between the two groups. We saw that especially in the example whereby the Israeli parliament, when they held a ceremony to commemorate Pope John the 23rd, a substantial amount and number of the parliamentarians, especially those of the ultra-orthodox right-wing parties, actually excluded themselves from that particular ceremony. And these are individuals that want to institute and change the constitution to one that changed Israel to a Jewish state. And what we argue as a result is that they, in fact, boycotted that particular ceremony, because these are Jews who, in their scriptures and in their believe that Christianity, as well as Catholicism, is equivalent to idolatry, and in fact is something that is deeply problematic. And in fact, members of this house, we still see some level of persecution towards Christians within the state of Israel itself. So things and they are usually seen as second-class citizens to the Jewish people, just like the Muslims within Israel, right? They are deprioritized things like education and healthcare. We think that this is an issue that the Pope should care about, and we think further exacerbates. What did he exactly say in the particular statement, and how is it seen by the parties involved? What he did was to call those territories the state of Palestine, and this has several implications. That particular word, the particular phrase, the state of Palestine, means that it denies Israeli sovereignty over those areas and condemns the Israeli government for being in those areas. What we argue as a result is that this is where the Israeli state considered as an administered territory. And what this means is that you are essentially taking a side on the side of the Palestinians. But we realize this, while many of us has certain views on where, what has been done. This is an issue that's ultimately not determinative, right? Meaning there's no objective answer to whether this is a state of Palestine or not, or whether either party is right in taking their particular stance. In fact, most nations, including the United States and many European states, consider it a dispute, but have never ever called them explicitly the state of Palestine. And because it implies that it is a illegally occupied state. What these statements that Pope Francis has done is that he has taken a clear stance on the side of the Palestinians. And we think it's problematic because it contradicts his role and his particular the responsibility and to ensure what we're going to be able to change the conflict, affect the conflict. But realize this, no one gives a shit what the Pope says but in this particular conflict. Why? Because we must realize that regardless of what the Pope says, the Israelis are not going to change their mind, the Palestinians are not going to change their mind, because this is an individual who has legitimacy on his own issues, on issues related to Christianity and the plight of Christians, but not necessarily geopolitics, right? And in fact, you are essentially going through a particular debate between two immovable objects and two groups of individuals that are not going to change their minds. And what you're going to do is going to worsen their impression and your ability to influence them in the long run. Yes.
On one hand, it affects the opinions of the Jews a lot. On the other hand, it won't change their minds whatsoever. Decide which
okay. Wow. Okay, I'm not sure the pattern of QI, right? It's not something that this thing. Why? Because what I'm essentially saying is here, number one, he's not going to influence the Israeli views on the particular issue, meaning they're not going to be it. And on the other hand, what it's going to affect is that they're going to make it a lot more antagonistic towards Christians within Israel who wasted your QI. And what the argument for this talk is that in this particular debate, what the Pope has legitimacy to do is advocate for Christians, which he undermines. What are the consequences of what he has done? First thing, we believe that he undermines the plight of Christian and non-Jewish people within the state of Palestine. No, thank you. But members of this house must understand that within Israel itself, they are already moving towards, they have already in place a ruling party led by Netanyahu who are fighting for the basic law within Israel to change to be one that cements Jewish as a national religion. And what we argue with this house is that and what I argue now is that the imperative here is for the Pope to ensure that Christians living within the state of Israel still have their religious freedom protected, still have their status as citizens protected. What this does with this house is that it gives legitimacy and political capital to the right-wing nationalists that we need to push forward with this particular policy, because otherwise it makes it even more difficult for us to do that in the long run. But what's more important is that we don't think that the Jewish people and the Jewish government is out there to screw over Christians, right? But what you want to do with this house is maintain your position as a potential advocate and mediator with the Netanyahu government. What this does with this house is that now the Pope is seen as an active enemy, an opponent of the Netanyahu government. What this does is undermines your ability to really negotiate and ensure that Christians are protected even in amidst the institution of the particular basic law. So we think from this house that instead of being seen as a respected potential ally that they can try and convince, now they are seen as a clear enemy they can never ever work with. And this brings me on nicely to my second point. They politicizes the position of the Pope and the role of the Pope, because we foresee in this house the Pope playing an important process within the peace process, but not to resolve the particular peace process, but to ensure that Christians are not caught in a crossfire and they suffer. What we believe that Pope can do is to ensure that he involves himself in the particular peace process to advocate for the plight of the Christian people within this particular conflict, to ensure that they are protected, to ensure that they are not negatively affected. What this does is that now the Pope as a political body will not be included, because now he's seen in one step or another. We don't think that it undermines his ability to advocate for Christian rights, which is his primary role. So we argue with this house that it politicizes the role of the Pope to allow him to do important things and protect Christian rights in the long run, going forward with this particular conflict. Members of this house must understand that in this particular circumstance, the Pope has a primary responsibility. And the primary responsibility is for Christians and Catholics, and not to resolve a century-long conflict between two groups of individuals who have never liked each other. For all these reasons, we are very proud to propose.
Here, for 7 minutes and 25 seconds. Call upon the elbow and Mitra. Here. Mr. Speaker, we think it's high time that millions of Palestinians who live under Israeli occupation have their claims supported and have moral legitimacy attached to their claim, something that I'm going to establish to you in this speech. This debate should not be judged on how Israeli domestic politics plays within Israel or how Israelis perceive the statement to be, or rather how millions of people around the world are affected in their moral claim and position, or whether or not they should support Israel as a cause, that Palestine as a cause that should be supported. I have a few arguments. First, the moral obligation to do so, why he has to be political and should be political in shaping the moral calculus of millions of people who believe in it. Secondly, the symbolic guidance to support moral cause and the consequences of exactly what's going to happen. And thirdly, how it legitimizes pro-Palestinian groups in the Western world. But rebuttals will be integrated, but there are 3 points that stick out. The first one that he said is that Christians in Israel are going to be discriminated. Firstly, the majority of Christians in Israel are Coptic Christians. They don't even belong to the Catholic Church to begin with. Like listen to things the Pope says, because he's not even part of the same church. So Galatians people just conflate all Christians around the world saying they're all Christians, hence they will be discriminated against. But secondly, it was really important. Jewish scripture discriminates against Christians. Jewish scripture existed far before Christian scriptures ever did. If you said the other I'll probably believe you. But to say that Christians in Israel are discriminated against is false. All things that he said, right to lack of access to education or opportunity, discrimination at the political level, are all problems Arabs in Israel face, not Christians in Israel, as a false claim. But thirdly, Coptic Christians, for their own benefit, are likely to distance themselves from the Pope anyway, right? If they think that their image is going to be harmed within Israel, it's very likely that Coptic Christians who always supported Jewish governments are likely to distance themselves from the Catholic Church and their claims anyway are going to be harmed in any regards. Moral obligation to do so, because unlike side of proposition, we will make a normative claim that the moral claim of Palestinians is right, and someone who stands up for the cause of hundreds and thousands of people around the world should support it. In 1897, when the Zionist movement began moving Jewish people to Palestine, we said nothing. In 1948, when 400,000 Arabs were displaced from their homeland, we said that the Jewish people have a claim to this land. In 1967, when Israel expanded their boundaries, we said it's self-defense to protect your home. It's exactly this narrative in the Western world which has allowed Israel to do things it continues to do right. Ever since it's continuously expanded its borders without respect to the sovereignty of Palestinian individuals. It has continuously violated all international norms and laws and has made efforts to try to increase their boundaries so as to render any two-state or one-state solutions unfeasible in the future. We will say on side opposition that the Pope's statement gives moral legitimacy to a claim which we think is a moral claim, Mr. Speaker. I think it's apt for him to do so. But as a leader of the world's largest Catholic body, Catholicism, which premises itself on the protection of life and care for those in need, he has a moral obligation to protect these individuals and make their issues a dominant issue in the Western world. That's why it's in line with principles of Catholicism, and that's why we should do this. Before I go on, yes.
The reality is that in this particular circumstance, you still have some Catholics within the state of Israel. They are going to suffer as a result of the action.
Okay. Oh, I told you the majority of Christians. Christians are 1% or 2% of the Israeli population. Out of that, probably 0.1% Catholics. Why is their claim more important than the claims of hundreds and thousands of Palestinians who otherwise suffer from under your family? Second, symbolic guidance to support moral cause and why that's a good thing. First, as leader of the world's largest theocracy, he reaches out to millions of people around the world and provides support and guidance to his followers. Such a statement is the more imperative for the millions of Christians who follow his every word to try and revise or at least reconsider their position on Israel. If they had no position, this brings Israel as a valid position to discuss. But if they did, it allows them to reinvestigate their position and whether or not they side on the same side as the Pope does. But secondly, at a point where the Palestinians are clamoring for rights and tension against Israeli occupation, something that's increased in the recent past, this comment brings massive attention at the individual level on how Israel is acting and what the moral side to be on is right. The fact that this makes it an actual issue in the minds of millions of voters living around the world who often look up to the Pope to seek moral guidance for the things that they vote on. In many countries who are detached from the actual conflict, many voters don't even consider this to be a part of the things that they vote on, right? Now the Pope makes an actual moral claim saying, this is the side that I am on, do you think that you should support me? That's the kind of stuff that support forces governments, pressurizes governments to change their stances when voters around the world, especially in Catholic countries, pressurize their governments to reconsider their stance on Israel. But secondly, support for the Palestinian cause is often weak in the Western world. They don't have a strong trade relations. They don't have a strong weapon exporting economy of Israel. They don't have a massive economic cloud, political cloud, which allows Israel to often change opinions, right? What is our policy? What is the Pope's statement allows to do? It mobilizes action by allowing pro-Palestinian groups to rally around the statement to garner support for their cause. We think that the fact of the Palestinians is often not considered as a realistic issue in the minds of hundreds and thousands of voters. What do you allow now? You allow small and fractured pro-Palestinian groups in the West to act. to actually use this as a rallying point to get support for their cause. They can use this as a rallying point to get support and get things like financial support, or even things like people who form blocks of political parties within their own countries to support this cause. We think it's extremely good. Yes.
Oh, wow. But you are assuming that this is going to result in any tangible change to even the 1% of Catholics that are within the country, which are the Pope's primary audience.
Okay, first, like I said, we think that Coptic Christians are the majority of Christians who find themselves in Israel. They're not Catholic. I agree. It might be possible that a few Catholics might be harmed. Right? Don't think that should be weighed against the plights of hundreds and thousands of Arab Palestinians who've been harmed in the future. If you say that his claim is only to a small fraction of Catholics in Israel, I think I would reject that claim. And I'm happy to say that I support a side which the Pope not just fights for people of his own religion, but people who belong to all other religions, irrespective of what they belong to. But lastly, the fact that there are extremely strong pro-Jewish lobbies which exist in the US, and they have existed since World War II for many reasons. The fact that of cultural ties and a large Jewish population which lives in the US. So the fact that the Jewish population has been considerably richer as compared to all other religions and have often formed political lobbies to support things like the Israeli cause within the US. Our policy gives pro-Palestinian groups like him at least a possibility to garner the same level of support, at least a possibility of using the Pope as a rallying cry and using that moral obligation that the Pope imposes on millions of his followers to try and get some support to oppose them. At our very best, at our very worst, we should do something to try and level the playing field in respect to the political pressure that Israel has with regard to the Palestinian cause. It is extremely shameful for proposition to say that the moral cause is not on the side of the Palestinians. I've established in my speech why we think that is so, why they deserve the moral claim on their side. We think as a person who dictates the moral calculus of millions of people around the world, he should side with what is right. And we've seen the Pope do this, right? Pope Francis has been extremely progressive in moving away from things like traditional dogma towards things which have practical consequences on individuals. The fact that his position on homosexuals and contraceptives have changed shows that he's willing to move away from dogma and protect individuals irrespective of what religion they belong to. Because we support the right side, because we think that Pope Francis' actions has massive beneficial consequences to the Palestinian cause, I'm extremely proud of this.
We want to turn the mic volume down because feedback is just like that. So just feel like adjust the mic, don't worry. Okay.
Where does this? How do we reduce the volume?
There's the volume down on the side.
It's not there. Just don't put your phone next to it.
Yeah.
And.
Thank you. You want your notes?
Okay, light support raising. Judges, can we just test the mic to see whether the feedback is?
Try. Very good. Okay, test 1 and 2. You put it here.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Too weird. I'm just gonna move too closer so it doesn't like.
Can we really put the thing lower so it doesn't like?
Does this work? Yeah. Alright.
Alright, DPM, here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid this debate is what the opposition has got really about the Israeli response to the Pope's statement that matter. How it changes the way in which the Israeli state and politicians react to Christians, how they will react to the kind of Palestinian conflict. We argued in Kenneth that it undermined these two priorities. We also argued that the Pope is not necessarily the best actor to work in such a public fashion. In fact, what I will add on in my substantive as a point of extension is how this policy of theirs, or this stance of Pope Francis, essentially isolates the Vatican, or at least creates a political effect upon the Vatican to the extent that it hurts the Vatican's ability to influence and act as a neutral mediator in conflict. Because we do think that the Catholic Church is an important party in world conflict, but we don't think that they should come up in the open to condemn people or condemn a particular state or particular political actor in such a manner that undermines the ability for bargaining, for proper, meaningful progress to occur. Let's see what Aditya argued first. He said that, well, this ultimately creates awareness. This was his first point in stance, right? He said, oh, this creates awareness so that everyone kind of knows about like the wrongs that the Palestinian people might be facing. On the first level, we think that the international community is sufficiently informed. We think that the international community has done to a large extent tried to intervene to alleviate the kind of problems there and has negotiated at an arm's length basis. We think that was quite good, and we think that will continue. But what we argue here today is that the moment you create this situation where the Pope condemns the Israelis on this level, the moment you call a state of Palestine saying this is an occupation, what you do is you implicitly condemn them for the abuses, for the settlement, everything. We think that creates an extremely hawkish Jewish nationalism that will emerge as a result of this policy. The very fact that things will be perceived, this is not just simply about, like saying this as it is. It's really about considering the consequences that flow from what is being said. But on the second level, what did they tell us? They told us, well, ultimately, like Christians don't matter in Israel because there are very little Christians. Even if there are quite a number of Christians, they're all Coptic. The first thing was say, like, well, the Pope represents a face of Christians all around the world. We don't think it necessarily fully represents Catholics. But more than that, what we argue is that the kind of perceptions that we form of Christians, we think ultimately this undermines the way in which you build the bridges that have been hurt over the passage of history. We argue that other minority groups, such as Arabs in Israel, are also going to be undermined and prejudiced as a result of such a statement by the Pope, to the extent that they'll be seen as individuals who are acquiescent, of individuals who stand for particular philosophies. But then they said, oh, but this is the right thing to do. It is right because without the Palestinian land, we occupy. A couple of responses. First of all, we don't think it's like very clear where the legal lines have stood at the moment. Calling it completely a Palestinian state ignores the nuances that lie beneath the surface. Given the fact that there have been land swaps that have occurred ever since the Six-Day War, given that there have been resettlements, given that there have been so many transactions that have occurred over the passage of time, we argue it's a complex issue. And to say that it's like a moral right as a whole is to misunderstand the issue, is to completely draw a very clear line. We don't think it is that clear. Given that it's currently negotiated, there's a negotiation that's occurring, we argue that that is actually the best way to go. But then they made this last argument on like how this ultimately creates the pressurizing effect on governments around the world to act against Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, we argue that that kind of like, okay, on the first level, if that occurs, we think that that's a negative response to the extent that it prompts Israeli nationalism at even a greater level. Because we argue that the kind of the kind of nationalistic sentiment that festers within the Israeli state happens and becomes at its highest the moment a large portion of the world challenges the territorial sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Israeli people. More than that, we think like on the second level, we think it just won't happen. To the extent that we don't think states are so stupid enough to kind of burn political bridges with Israel. To the extent that we don't think that Catholic votes very much faith. And on a greater level, we think like Catholics, like, okay, then just Catholic people, right? I'm Catholic myself. They're voters too. They're rational individuals. They decide on a multiplicity of issues. So just because the Pope says, oh, this is one particular issue, we don't think that politicians will be affected to not such a great extent. It's not that big a deal. What you do under their policy is you undermine the ability or undermine the kind of progress that we've seen, prompting a hawkish response that will arise from the Israeli Knesset. And we think that's extremely harmful because you put them at the pedestal, you make them move their agenda forward. And that hurts Christians, that hurts Palestinians, that hurts the conflict. The election of right-wing parties in Israel is indicative of the fact that Jewish nationalism exists irrespective of this comment. At least we bring to the light the kind of things that Israel is doing to the Palestinian people.
No. Just because you say Israel right-wing parties are sometimes swayed doesn't mean that under your policy, when the moment this happens, their strength goes stronger. Their positions become cemented. Because then it becomes very clear that the world is against us. The Catholics are against us that form a large proportion of like, according to society. We think that's very horrible. We don't think they address those lines of argumentation that have been taken on our side of the house. Now, I want to move on to substantive and tell you how this ultimately undermines the overall position of the Catholic Church, especially within this conflict.
Given the fact that you recognize that the kind of reconciliation efforts and the perception of the Catholic Church have been increasing gradually over the past 2 or 3 cycles of polls, we argue that when you do something like this, when you outrightly out and out come up to condemn the Israeli state for what they are doing, saying that there's an illegal occupation and challenging the territorial integrity, what you do is you create a perception within the minds of the political actors within the Palestinian conflict that these individuals, or the church in general, is a political entity that's trying to influence politics. We think that's harmful. Why is that so? Because it harms the way in which the Catholic Church has traditionally engaged global leaders. If you understand the way in which Catholic and Vatican politics have occurred in the 20th century, it has never been so much an out-and-out condemnation of particular state actors. It has always been like, the whole I think Chinese people understand like the 1C kind of way in which you go about negotiating particular peace norms. We don't say like the Catholic Church ultimately should stand for wrongs, but we argue that the Catholic Church ought to be able to effect its position not through the means of like a blunt tool of like global condemnation, but a more careful and contemplated one. Because if you understand the way in which the Catholic Church works, it doesn't work as an international body to the extent that it's a country with political interest. It's more of a faith-based system. And that's why they can do certain things like condemnation of like persecution of gays, for instance, because that's part of church doctrine and dogma. We argue that when it comes to the issue of Israel, it's a careful political item that needs to be treated with delicate care. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that's the best way to move forward with a Catholic Church that's informed, it's neutral, and it can best effect the change. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand for peace too. We just think that the church coming up bluntly says something like what Pope Francis did is a blunt way to achieve that peace. We propose.
7 minutes, 31 seconds. All right, yellow, move lady, here.
Your heart is anyway.
Ash, how's the window close already now? Alright, are you ready for me?
How do I make this work?
Flip it to your shirt.
Keep it to your jacket.
Okay, yes?
Does that work?
Yeah.
Overrush.
Okay, good.
So after Kenneth spent about 7 minutes on his wild tangent about a small minority of Coptic Christians in Israel, we realized that Calvin began to realize the untenability of making this debate all about that, and began to slowly shift away from the main priority of the Arab-Israeli conflict and how Israel would truly respond to that. Thanks, bro. Okay, we realized, right, that the Pope is not only a Christian or Catholic guy, he's the leader of a country. He is also a moral guy, and luckily enough, he influences a great part of the secular world as well. That is why Mishra said that he is obliged and also principally right to basically bring the idea of Palestinian oppression and displacement over decades to light at last. I'm going to deal with 3 rebuttals before I begin. First and foremost, despite the shit, I was still doing this Coptic Christians rubbish anyway. He came and told us, right, that the context of tension between Christians and Jews. Seriously, what tension? Give me one example where a Jewish or Christian state or group are denying statehood and rights to each other, or firing missiles at each other. That sounds familiar, right? Because I think there's actually the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We therefore realize the Compass's debate is really about the Palestinians who are displaced, who are being hurt, who are dying in the missile strikes. That is a true intractable conflict you are so much more concerned about. Why is that a bigger concern? simply because they consider for their prime minister that the Pope, right, is also a political body. Those are his exact words. Therefore, as an influential body who often comments on international issues, especially religious conflicts, we think they should therefore act to check the growing Israeli belligerence towards Muslim Palestinians. And we realize that this idea of hawkish Jewishism comes in here, right? Because they are hawkish right now anyway. In fact, right, we see a great deal of harm that's already happening. So it's really unfair of Calvin to come out and say there's a complex issue where no parties are wrong. Because Israel is pushing advantage in an unfair way. Israel is being extremely violent. They have resettled Jewish people in the Palestinian regions, breaking agreements without any concern for the rights and the welfare of Palestinian refugees. They have shown growing encroachment into Palestinian territories. And basically, right, every time anyone tries to protest nicely and say it's not fair, they use this culture of siege mentality to say no, we should go ahead and have all our preemptive ballistic missile strikes anyway. We also see that Mitra brought out the right-wing slant that is happening in Israel right now, right? Where we see that the Jewish Pope is the second largest party in parliament. And all that happened even before the Pope said anything. Basically, Israel is doing violent, unfair things, not because the Pope made a comment, but because they can get away with it. They get away with violating territorial sovereignty without being checked. That is why we need to check them right now. That brings me on to my second article, on whether they are effective in the Arab-Israeli conflict or not. Whether this comment actually makes a difference. They came and told us from the start that it's not in a moment, sir, that it won't change minds for the Arab-Israeli conflict. Yet they came out and tell us it's an influential political body. The point is, I don't know why they're saying that some comments on religion have a great influence, but some other comments will not make a difference. We think it's inconsistent. We rather buy the idea that people have a great view of effect. But before I move on to that, I will
Given that you accept the siege mentality that results in Israel throwing standing missiles and resettling even more settlements, why don't you think that effect will be amplified when the Catholic Church makes such an out-and-out statement? Simply because Israel would do it anyway, unless an international body, international party is able to say, we see what you're doing, it's not fair, and we're willing to fully check you to do it. Therefore, the only proper stance we can take now is for you to say something is wrong. We're not going to pretend it's okay. We're not going to let you deflect negotiations and things like the release of US spies any longer. So moving back, right, whether it's effective or not, we realize that the trust entire case went unrebutted, right? We told you the religious condemnation from a religious leader like a Pope actually stops Israeli deflection and so on, stops Israeli justification of preemptive strikes, increase international recognition. It's a rallying point for concern about Palestine in the West, and in fact strengthens pro-Palestinian troops. Bring it a bit further, right? We recognize that the Pope is someone that people truly respect. We are average Christian or Catholic men to many nations, to the media. So therefore, we think that it's truly fair. I will bring that a bit further in my case, but before that, the last rebuttal. Calvin's case for the Vatican as a neutral mediator. The Pope is never neutral. The Pope takes stances on things like homosexuals, like contraceptives, things that talked about from the start, very controversial issues. Furthermore, we realize that as a leader of the country, the Vatican, right, as a theological leader, he has more right than anybody to comment on religious state conflicts around the world. More importantly, even if it's neutral and meant to be neutral, which we don't buy, the time for neutrality has passed simply because Israeli religions can no longer be checked anymore. More importantly, I have already shown you how you must take a stance to check that this road is pushing boundaries further and further, but they've never shown us what is the value of being neutral. With so many Western states that step back and like Israel doing this thing, and things are just getting worse. Until proposal neutrality is important, none of this case can stand. That brings you on nicely to my case. No, thank you, sir. They're very interested about religion, right? So I'll look at how this affects Muslim Christian religions in the world, not just your Coptic Christians. Okay, let's characterize what is happening between Muslims and Christians, right? We realize that often Muslim Christian religions are a hotbed of misunderstandings. We realize the Christian world and the Muslim world share some sort of antagonism at times. We see in things like beginning from the Crusades, all the way to conflict across Africa that continue today, right? And the Saduka and the Balaka conflict in the Central African Republic. We see infrequent outbreaks of violence. This is exacerbated by states, organizations, and authorities that perceive Westerners as a threat to their Muslim identity. So what happens under our paradigm? We think now the Pope comes in. The Pope comes in and basically comments on the fate of innocent Palestinians, puts his repulsion to state belligerence of humane concerns over Christianity or Catholicism's reactions or connections to Judaism. So what is the effect that's therefore created?
as the representative of the Catholic world, right, that this person should come out and make a comment on the Arab-Israeli conflict, a conflict grounded in a largely Arab-Muslim region, and do that in support of Muslim Palestinians is extremely powerful, especially because all Arab Islamic states really care about what is going on in Israel, and in fact refuse to recognize Israel as a state. What is therefore the outcome? We create better interfaith understanding cooperation around the world, because that repositions the Catholic Church in the eyes of firstly Muslim people who have ever felt threatened by Christianity. Governments of Islamic states that bad links to the West and have always grappled with fears of being overcome by a Judeo-Christian narrative of death. Governments of Islamic states who actually want to align themselves with the West, but fear doing so because the public support in the home is against them to be considered a support. And fourthly, without place a register of terrorist groups in inciting violence against Muslims or against Christians because of a religious or sectarian bias, say Boko Haram, say Ansar. Therefore, we think that we best create peace, not only in Israel, not only in checking Israel villages and protecting Palestinians, but also around the world across religions. For all that, we devotion should fall.
7 minutes and 21 seconds.
Can I not care about this thing?
Yeah.
Government, when you're ready.
First thing you've got to do. Oh wait, I'm doing it. First thing we've got to do is we've got to understand what Pope Francis actually did. All he did was that he called those areas Palestinian, Israeli-administered Palestinian territories, Palestinian state. Now, in the perception of Israel, this is something that undermines the sovereignty, that attacks the fundamental legitimacy of the state, and it's something that doesn't necessarily go true because the extent of Israeli territory and Palestinian territory is going to be disputed. What he didn't do was that he didn't start suddenly condemning all of Israel's actions in this area explicitly. Now, I know Kelvin said implicit condemnation, but that's the perception that is received in Israel. What he didn't do is he didn't do all the things that Uadc claimed he did. He didn't start suddenly becoming an advocate for Palestinian rights. He didn't start suddenly forming groups to say and funding groups to talk about that were pro-Palestinian. He didn't suddenly start calling for Israel to remove from this particular area. All he did was say the state. So to the extent that they want to argue that the Pope Francis can now make some moral crusade against Palestinians in Israel, the fact is that hasn't happened. The fact is that's not going to happen because the Pope recognizes it undermines his interest here in Israel. So the Pope recognizes it doesn't have that much moral sway to begin with in this area. Anyway, I'm going to talk about three things today. The first thing I want to talk about is who matters in this particular debate. The second thing I want to talk about is whether this is the right thing to do. Last, I want to talk about the role of the Vatican. Let's talk about who matters in this particular debate. Because their main argument as it evolved from Uadc was that look, we need to do something to check Israel, right? And so the Pope is the best agent to do this because he sheds publicity on this issue. I think our first response to that is that a great deal of publicity has already been shared. People are pro-Israel not because they don't know anything about Palestine. And pro-Palestinian groups are weak not because people don't know anything about Palestine, but because the country's geopolitical interests support Israel. It's because of the history of the Holocaust and what was done to Israel that caused countries to support those particular things. Now, what their logic here was they needed to prove many things. They needed to prove first that the Pope's statements would change the mind of Catholics, then that as Catholics change their minds, they will influence world leaders, and world leaders, once they change their minds, will someone influence Israel to actually change, right? They have proved none of these particular things. The first thing that somehow the Pope would change Catholic minds, I think our response to that was that first, Catholics, to the extent that they accept the Pope as some form of moral authority, accept him as a moral authority to the extent they talk about church doctrine. This has nothing to do with church doctrine. Even in relation to church doctrine, there are many Catholics who disagree with the Pope on a wide variety of issues. Just because the Pope says something doesn't mean that people necessarily believe it, right? He's not Jesus Christ. Just because Catholics believe certain things, they're going to prove to us why world leaders will change in any way. World leaders respond to geopolitical incentives. World leaders respond to the interests of those states. And currently, those interests are supported by supporting Israel. Then you need to prove to us how, so even if we take that case at its highest, that somehow, look, we will be able to gather this. When the Pope make a statement, somehow we gather this huge gathering of world leaders to pressure Israel. I think they've never responded to our argument. All this does is entrench the idea of entrench the nationalists in Israel who believe that under a super, right? Who entrench the idea that Israel needs to stand up against the world for persecuting them. Who deny, therefore, any attempt at political mediation. Who deny any attempt at entry into negotiation. Who deny any attempt by other world leaders to broker a peace because they believe that none of these people can be trusted. We don't think that's a good thing. So,
at least we allow pro-Palestinian groups to refer to this statement as a rallying cause, then force moral imperative on individuals.
Yeah, but okay. So first, pro-Palestinian groups, whether or not Pope said anything, right? They refer to the suffering. That in themselves is a bigger record. But second, how on earth the Pope is saying, look, now the Pope has recognized us as a Palestinian state. Therefore, we are right. Let's understand something. Everyone recognizes that a Palestinian state should exist. The goal of the talks peace treaty is to establish a Palestinian state. What the dispute is about, amongst a lot of other things in this area, is the extent to which part of these territories, which part actually belong to Israel, which part actually belong to Palestine. So to the extent that you say we should recognize a Palestinian state, Pope is saying nothing new. What he is doing is he's saying that the entirety of this territory belongs to Palestine. As that disputed, that's not something that's necessarily true. You don't see why he had to comment in this particular draft, right? So they never engage with our analysis that the response of Israeli nationalists, the right-wing groups, is to entrench the position, is to deny any attempt by people with the issue. All they've argued is, look, this group existed before, so it's not as if Pope started everything. So, but what we argue to you is more nuanced position. What the Pope statement does is it undermines Jewish-Israel relations, which is more difficult, it entrenches the position within Israeli politicians that want to enact policies that support the nature of Israel as a Jewish state, that implicitly and consequently then undermines the groups, other religious minorities within Israel itself. They've argued further that, look, the Pope doesn't do any because the majority of Christians in Israel are Coptic Christians, so people don't care. I think they haven't responded to our first argument. That is about the context in which this takes place, the context of Catholic-Israel relations, as well as the fact that the Pope is seen as a representative of Christians because the Catholic Church for the longest time was a historical institution representing Christians who persecuted Israelis. No response on this particular point. Let's talk about that. So we think that therefore this debate is relevant to the extent that it actually makes change. And to the extent that it actually enacts change, that's what I want to talk about. Israel is the most relevant actor here. That's why Calvin argued to you that the role of the Vatican in this particular case is to be able to act as a mediating institution, to act as a neutral body that both sides can trust, to the extent that they will work through backdoor channels to effect change, to change mindsets in slow, methodical ways. Their response was that, look, we don't think the church should be seen as neutral, it's some like moral thing, right? But let's really think about what makes a difference. We've argued to you that we actually do. Let's talk next about Muslims, right? Because that's their main argumentation here. And this is a chapter goes to. Alright. So this argument was that this improves Muslim-Christian relations. Let's understand something. Muslim-Christian relations are there not necessarily because of the Pope, but because of the position of Muslims in these particular areas, as well as the long-running historical grievances that are located at different in every single country. Moreover, if you want to argue to us that look, the Catholic Church doesn't represent all a bunch of other Christians, then the majority of Christians in these Arab nations aren't Catholic as well. So a whole bunch of Coptic Christians in Egypt as well who won't be affected by your policy in any shape or form. What we argue to you is that their policy does not affect those things. But because of the unique interaction between the Catholic Church and the Jewish state, because of the unique nature and interaction between the Catholic Church and European Jews, that the position of the Catholic Church vis-a-vis the Israeli state, something that's particularly important when it comes to Israel. There is no impact in relation to the Muslim world, but the Muslim world has very different interactions, a whole bunch of different Christians who then respond and interact very, very differently. On this level, Mr. Speaker, because we believe the most relevant actor in this debate is Israel. And Israel is one who's going to react negatively, Israel is going to harm people more, and we actually are better able to position the change they want, but they've never been able to prove. We take this debate.
Right. Oh, wait, you here?
We now know why NUSA hasn't been doing well at tournaments recently. Because they have been flip-flopping stances throughout their speeches without actually having a consistent approach to what they want. Because on one hand they say the Pope statement has absolutely no value in representation and changes absolutely nothing. On the other hand, the Pope statement is so legitimate and will change so much on the ground. They cannot have it both ways. We're going to do two things in the speech. We're going to look at what is the Pope's role and what exactly he does, and then we're going to look at consequences to both the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and then the one that you wanted to drop, domestic Israeli politics. Let's look at what is the Pope's role. The argument we made on this side was that its aim was to protect lives by being a moral guide about what's right and wrong, which means that they were not just about protecting Christian rights, especially Pope Francis, considering his shift towards allowing atheists in and wanting to be open and all of that, which meant it was regressive to say that they were only going to protect Christians and screw everyone else because I want to continue to be brave and inconsistent because that's how it's legitimate. So should the Pope take a stance? Principally, yes, because the Pope has a responsibility to be a moral guide. So principally, the Pope should take a stance. But let's look at what practically should be the case. The argument from side government was it's better for them to be a neutral arbiter. Neutrality is somewhat important. Why? When has it been legitimate for the Vatican or the Pope to be a neutral arbiter in the Israel-Palestine conflict? What value does the Vatican have in being a mediator? Especially if you write KK's case that Israel hates Christians in status quo and that the government doesn't like Christians in general, then what exact value does the Pope have in being a neutral arbiter? It has absolutely no value in making anything. But secondly, we tell you, it is still taking a stance to not call it the state of Palestine because you're taking the other side's stance. We think that it's not being neutral when you just not call it the state of Palestine. Let's look at consequences and the one thing that side eventually dropped. The 1% of the 1% amongst people in Israel who are going to be hurt. Because the argument from Kenneth was there are some Jewish leaders at some point who avoided a Christian ceremony, which means that there are some people that are persecuted in Israel. We don't think that that is legitimate as a stance of persecution. One. But two, we told you it's unlikely that these people are going to be persecuted from Hong Yu's analysis himself. When he tells you that Christians often disagree with the Pope, and therefore it's very easy to separate yourself from the ideologies of the Pope, and therefore the likelihood of oppression from these people is going to be low. But secondly, we told you these are people who have always been supportive of the Jewish government, which means that the Jewish government is unlikely to clamp down on them unnecessarily, which means that the possibility or the concept of the Christians in the country are going to be affected doesn't exist in this debate. Even if it does, there's a bigger picture to protect, and we're happy to say that there are 1 or 2 people in Israel are going to be harmed by it, but millions of others are going to be saved. Let's look at prompting Israeli nationalism and belligerence. Before that, go.
So if you argue that the way for Christians to gain acceptance in Israel is by disassociating themselves with the Pope, what you're saying is that for Christians to gain acceptance, they must deny that there exists a Palestinian state.
No, that's not how logic works. I'm sorry. The point of logic in this scenario is that one, these Christians aren't really the Christians that we're talking about because in Israel they're not the same Christians. But two, we think that in all these scenarios that the state of Israel can do anything they want regardless of what they want if you buy the rhetoric of Israeli belligerence on that side. The Israeli belligerence is going to happen regardless of what happens anyway, and therefore it's going to be a harm. Let's go into this, right? Because their argument was, no matter what happens, no matter what no matter what happens and no matter what you say, Israeli belligerence is going to happen. That's an argument for never checking on anything and never doing anything for the Palestinian people because Israeli belligerence is going to happen and people are going to be affected. They cannot come up and say, let's let this conflict happen for another 40 years because you know what, we're scared of Israeli belligerence happening. But we told you on this side, they may be right-wing in Israel, but they're not batshit crazy. Their actions are balanced with the ability to have the check and balance of international community. International and moral condemnation was a further check and a creation of this as a dominant issue in society so that they can't get away with the Israeli belligerence that happens in status quo. That's why you need that issue to be dominant in society and to continue to be discussed. They did want to respond to it. How then do you actually help the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? We told you that you needed to be able to give legitimacy to the concept, that you needed to mobilize action, give credibility to pro-Palestinian groups, because the level of statehood actually values a lot for these pro-Palestinian groups, to be able to get their legitimacy on the ground, to get their cause moving, to get their states to have more action against it. That's what the pro-Palestinian groups need. The discourse that sparks because of that statement, because it's not just about the Pope saying a few words and nothing happens after that. There's a huge discourse that sparks from it. The media analysis that comes out of it, the millions of Christians that talk about it on a daily basis now, that's exactly what leads to the kind of condemnation of the Israeli belligerence, that leads to the kind of change that we wanted on our side. But then the argument on their side was, but publicity is shared already and nothing changes. That's the same argument we use on our side. Israel is belligerent already, so nothing changes. We think that change actually does happen. We think that we're ability to have it as a dominant issue compared to status quo, where it dies down and nothing really happens because of it, is a good thing. But lastly, we told you that actually it's better for interfaith understanding, right? Because we told you that it's important to downplay the rhetoric of religious terrorism and extremism because it affects a lot more people. We told you that what it means is that as a Pope who is a valued member of the Christian community in the Catholic world, and acceptance that Muslim people are right, that they have a claim to statehood, that they have a legitimate opportunity or legitimate right to wanting something for themselves, and therefore have the ability to call them out or to be able to represent them for it, is a good thing. Because the Pope identifying that the Arab world can be right and therefore we can associate ourselves with them and be friends with them is an important statement for Christian-Arab relations around the world. The response from them was to say, well, no, it's not really true because it doesn't really exist. Yes, it does. We think the huge amount of Christian-Arab conflict that happens in status quo in Africa and around the world is an example or a reason for why the Pope should stand for what the Muslim population wants and should stand in support for the areas where the Muslim people can be right. The argument on the other side was, but the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is complex. We don't really know which side is right and which side is wrong. But the difference is this: Israel are the douchebag sides that are expanding their territories just for the sake of hurting Palestinian people. They are the douchebag sides that can accept certain things in policy or in principle, but not want to effectively implement any of the things that they want to accept. We think that sure, it may be a complex historical background, but it's not the Palestinians that are doing the things that are killing millions of people around the world. At the end of the day, what do we say the Pope needs to do? He needs to be able to stand for one, the ability to ensure that the best relations come out of Christian-Muslim populations, but two, he needs to be able to take a stance that's in the right direction, to set a moral guide for most numbers of people in the world to be able to stand in the right direction. We're very proud to oppose.
741.
Okay. Audible, right? Am I amplified?
Yeah.
The undeniable fact is that one statement can make a lot of difference. When Martin Luther King came out and said, I agree. When Obama came out and said, yes, we can. It makes a difference because it is hope. It's promise of great structural change. When Kenneth Khan came out and said, this debate about the Arab-Israeli conflict must be about the smallest, least affected Christian minority in Israel, it's a promise that they read the debate completely wrong. Therefore, we realize when the Pope comes out and makes a statement about the state of Palestine, we see it's really important. That's precisely why Israel always walks out of negotiations. And that's how the Palestinian delegation is addressed to begin with. Because it is always about denying statehood to the Palestinians. It's the only way to justify by saying that Palestine is not a state. That is precisely why this statement was so effectual in our part in bettering what is going on in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Today I'm going to do three things that cropped out in this debate. First and foremost, I'm slightly ashamed to address what the problem in the Arab-Israeli conflict actually is. We told you time and again, you see things like Israel firing missiles on Palestinian homes of the civilians. You see forced resettlement into Palestinian territories, depriving Palestinians of their homeland. You see how Israel deflects the topic whenever big organizations and mediators try to come to the picture. They say things like, look, there's a US Palestinian in prison decades ago. Let's talk about that instead of the Palestinian refugees. And the problem, right, is that big organization mediators let them get away with it. We see a great asymmetry of power between Israel and the Palestinians simply because the Palestinians have no state, have no power, have no ability to fight against Israel, and because the international community encourages its belligerence. This asymmetry is therefore what we talk about today. How do we best protect the Palestinians who are being so very oppressed? That brings me on to the second issue. What therefore is the calculus of this debate? How do we decide what the Pope should do in responding to this situation? Precisely because of Israeli belligerence. Precisely because Israel is being unfair. A characterization never fully took down, right? That is why the Palestinians and their plight should be the priority for anyone, especially someone who poses himself as a great and important moral figure, who looks out for the common man, who speaks out for the oppressed, basically the Pope. And more importantly, this is definitely not the time for any neutrality they espouse. What they're basically saying is, oh look, one state is hurting another, but let's not care about it. Because somehow the fact that the other state can't fight back is, well, okay with us. We should be neutral about it when one state is bullying another. It's even worse in this case because Palestinians don't even have the rights that come with having a state to protect you. So given that the Palestinians are so very oppressed, we think that something really must be done in their favor. And that is not pretending that the balance is fair on both sides to find it out without external help. But assuming that both our methods work, right? Let me compare the two methods. We told you that we want this statement to change, to have international recognition, to change people's minds. They came out and said they wanted neutral mediation, right? On our side, we gave you multiple substantives on how it finally becomes the first person to really call Israel out for what it is doing, bullying, oppression, being unfair. And at the same time, I came and told you how it changes Arab-Christian relations. We don't think that this sort of thing was really done on our side, right? Because they only really flip-flop on whether people actually listen to the Pope. Yeah, they can't do this to the Pope, right? And furthermore, their case also resonates with the Pope does hold some sort of sway over people around the world in different countries. Furthermore, our characterization as a religious figure, a world leader, and a political body in their words also supports that. So we do think the change and recognition that happens will do this. They came out and told us they were a neutral mediator, right? First and foremost, we told you many times that the Pope is never fully neutral. And in any case, by not calling this area a state, right, they are also not very neutral. Why is that so? Because state recognition is the main crux of any Arab-Israeli crisis. Therefore, that's precisely why recognition of statehood is really that powerful. That history of one recognition really changes the states. Therefore, looking at neutrality is really that important, right? Or the really one is marriage counseling for a long and protracted conflict. But we know that one statement makes a huge lot of difference. They're not sure of this difference. They're not sure what effect this difference will make. I don't think they know what's going on in Israel, right? But we think what the Pope has done is right. It's fair and will truly make change. For all those reasons, I'm extremely proud to oppose.
There's a reason why NTU has been doing better than usual. Because they have chosen an NUS alumni to be the anchor speaker later. But one is not going to be better than three. And the death knell in NTU's case was when they disregarded all analysis about how this will affect the plight of Christians all across the world, and how the main responsibility of the Pope was to ensure that Christian rights are secure. But let's just deal with the other side of the debate. That the Arab-Israeli conflict should be higher on the Pope to do this. That he should just not give a shit about people who call him the leader of their church. Now, what we have shown you in our speeches was that this trade-off was only truly worthwhile if he could actually do something about it. So, can he actually do anything about it? And this was what Hui and their new base tried to extend on in their reply, right? Was the idea that, well, now when you talk about this and call it state of Palestine, Israel will suddenly become less belligerent, right? Because he is the Pope, and well, everyone listens to him because he's the Pope. But we told him multiple times, he's not Jesus, he's not going to listen to you that way. But we argued to ourselves to multiple levels that he's influential to a certain extent only in terms of church doctrine, in things that he has legitimacy over. And even then, right, he has limited influence in that, you know, many countries have legalized homosexual marriage in spite of what the Pope says, right? And what we have argued here is that their only response to this idea that the Pope is influential is that say that Catholics elsewhere will do something about it. But we clearly showed that these individuals are rational actors that care about their own political interests first and less about what the Pope says, especially on things that are necessarily important to them in the immediate future. Then the second argument was about awareness, right? As if people weren't already aware of what's going on in the Arab-Israeli conflict already. And that the legitimacy of that particular actors and Palestinian actors already exists, given that, you know, these individuals were suffering, right? And so we don't think that he does anything extra, given that the only thing he has done is call it the state of Palestine. They have not truly shown us the particular effect that would be accrued here. Moreover, members of the House, they are second guessing to say, well, this helps to repair Muslim-Christian relations late in Hui's speech. But what we have shown you in response was that this is not going to help because the tension between Muslim and Christians stem far beyond what the Pope can repair. It's things about history. It's things about the political structures that exist that the fundamental Muslims as well as moderate Muslims disagree with. We don't think, members of this House, that given the tenuous nature of the possibility of being able to affect anything, this is worthwhile to give up the people who truly matter. And who are individuals who truly matter? The people who truly matter in this debate are the Coptic Christians, are the handful of Catholics, because no one gives a shit about them, right? Like they said. And that's exactly the problem. The Pope is the only person that cares for his house, that is tasked with the responsibility to do so. And we think of his house, given that these individuals exist in a context whereby there's a momentum of right-wing nationalists trying to institute a basic law that could potentially undermine their plight. What we argue is that given the ambiguity and uncertainty that exists, the Pope needs to be an actor that can influence the government to ensure that the plight of these Christian and non-Jews are being protected. But he cannot do so. And this was an analysis I brought you right from the first speaker's speech. He cannot do so when he's seen as an enemy of the Palestinian, of the Jewish and Israeli state. Because now what he does is that he's seen as an enemy. But the reality is that before he made this mistake, there was warming relations, right? There was an increased number of people of this over the years. There was a ceremony there within the Israeli to honor a Pope. But what this has done, members of this House, is to reverse all of those efforts. And what we argue, members of this House, is that he needs to be in the mix. What we have shown you, members of this House, is that in the long run, when there is a crossfire between the Jews as well as the Muslims, we need to be there, the Pope needs to be in the mix to secure the rights of the Christians, to secure the plight of the Christians that he is tasked to do, and he has the legitimacy to do. For all these reasons, I'll see you in the finals.
Alright, everyone, thank you for the debate. You may leave now and chill out in the main hall while the judges agonize. Thank you.
Mitra,
Oh!